Say, is it working? I've been told not to tap it and say, is it working? Well, good afternoon. Hope you enjoyed tea. Who had ice cream? Good, good. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. My name's Kay Johnson. I joined as surety on Wednesday. I landed in New Zealand on Sunday last week, so fairly new here, but not new to Agile. I've been doing Agile since about 2007, so with IBM. So trying to change a huge, tanker has been fun. But I'd like to introduce Andrew Hood from the Ministry of Social Development. I could have read his bio, but you can read his bio on your app. But apparently, Andrew got into IT security at school, where he hacked into his college network. And when two of his teammates got thrown out of college, he decided to get out of that game, at least for the time being. He then moved into a kind of a team that was looking at internet content and actually got paid to look at porn. So, very interesting guy. I've enjoyed talking to him. Andrew, over to you, mate.
Thank you, Kay. Yeah, I've had some fairly unusual jobs, which is kind of good fun. But yeah, you do end up doing some very, very odd things at times. Anyway, yeah, my name's Andrew Hood. I'm the IT security manager for the Ministry of Social Development. And yep, we're late in the day, and I'm talking about security. I mean, someone turned up. Great. I mean, it makes me feel so special. It's either that or you're just trying to make sure you get the good seats for, Rachel's presentation in a bit. But right, about me. Yeah, I'm not very agile. I mean, most of my career has been spent doing big, technical, industrial stuff. I don't do agile-y things. I put in global networks for telcos. Those don't go in Agile. I've not been a developer for 21 years, and to date the last development I did was in Lotus Notes 3, which might be a reason I don't do development anymore. I ended up in IT security because when you run global networks for years and years and years, you kind of end up doing a lot of security because everybody spends their time breaking into your stuff. And it's kind of like, yeah, this seemed kind of fun, but it's not exactly agile. But now everybody's doing it, I've got a bit of a problem. So where does this then bring me to that title? Did anybody spot the title of my talk? Anybody get the film reference? Oh, come on. There's 20 odd of you. Please, someone tell me you've seen one of the greatest films of all time. So, Dr. Strangelove. Peter Sellers' film, one of the great comedies of all time. If you've not seen it, go rent the DVD or whatever hipster people do nowadays, because it is actually one of the most brilliantly hysterical films ever done. And the kind of reference to what we're talking about today, well, it ends up with the destruction of the entire planet. Linked to Agile, that's exactly what your IT security manager thought you said when you said you were going to use Agile. Oh my God, I spent years and years and years, I've been doing all these processes. They're really big, they're heavyweight, they're massive, got door wedges, and then no one does those anyway. And now you want to come along and do Agile, and Agile is you guys talking around about lots of stuff and you never seem to understand it and you don't have requirements. It's all gone horribly wrong. Yeah, that's pretty much what we hear when projects come to us. Which is a bit kind of daft, because there must be a better way of doing this. So the talk I'm going to do today is not about how to do software development. It is not how to do agile coding, about testing regimes and that kind of stuff. There is lots and lots and lots of good stuff about that. If you've got a time machine, go back to this morning, watch the presentation this morning. Very interesting one about how to do bits and pieces like that. For those who saw Laura Bell talk here a couple of years ago, Laura has just put out a book on doing agile application security. There's tons of really good material out there. I'm not getting paid by Laura, but if her book sales go up, I want to cut. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff on this. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the unfortunate part of this industry. Certification accreditation. Because most of us are working in some kind of regime that has some kind of compliance. Banks have it, PCI DSS, HIPAA in the health sector. These are strict, big, rigorous frameworks. Now, the one I'm going to talk about today is the one that mainly impacts around here in Wellington, the government. And the government has written a beautiful framework. For those who've not been introduced to it, meet the New Zealand Information Security Manual. It's really, really good. It's not just good because it's written by GCSB, the Government Security Bureau. They're good because they do literally listen to everything you say. But it's good because of one really, really important reason. It's big, it's heavy, it damages the floor. That's what a security manual should be like. A security manual should be really intense. There's 660 pages in that thing. There's 1,284 controls. This is what we love about security. Totally over the top. Waterfall process. That's what we love. Now, the problem is now we tell you to have to use it. So what do? You do your Agile process, you go your Agile process, you go your Agile process, and then we smack you with a manual. And it all goes horribly wrong. Well, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to find the ways of backing all of this up. We're going to have to find a way of actually doing that manual, because it's not optional. You haven't got the way of saying, oh, I don't care. And if you're doing HIPAA and those kind of things, they're mandatory. We have to find ways of now building this into what you actually do in an Agile development life cycle. So let me just explain a little bit about what certification accreditation is about. It's a phrase that most people probably haven't come across. Certification is defined in the manual if anybody wants to have a read. You can pick it off the floor later. In section 4 and actually like most of the rest of it. But it comes down to 2 sections. Certification, understanding your risk. What's the risk of your application? What controls have you got in place to do with those risks? And preferably, how have you actually proved that those controls are in place? And what you do is you write that up and it comes in a nice thick door wedge like this, and it's called a certification pack. I think the worst one I've seen on government was 57 megabytes of PDF for a certification pack. They take weeks to write, which works well in your cadence of releasing twice a day. So you then get this wonderful thing called accreditation. And accreditation is the person who owns the risk. The person who's actually going to take all of that data that you're putting into it and saying, I'm happy putting my data into this. I'm happy having my customers use this service. Now, I love this process because if it all goes horribly wrong and it's all worked correctly, I don't get fired. We fire the person who accepted the risk. But reality is they're very, very heavyweight processes. Now, MSD decided that it was going to do a huge piece of transformational work. The way we deal with our beneficiaries, the way we deal with the public is changing. So we decided we were going to do a digital transformation project. And we're going to launch a lot of new things, one of which is a mobile app, MyMSD, very, very popular, 400,000 citizens now using it. So great outcome, but we're going to do this wonderful thing. We're going to release every 2 weeks. Great. I've got my manual. How does that fit? So I got asked, would I like to go and work on this project and see if we can figure out a way of making all of this fit together? And I said, okay. And we worked our way through this. And this is not just my work. This is work from a team of people who are working on that and said, there must be a way. There must be a way of taking DevOps, taking Agile, and putting it into security. And as we worked through it, we actually found out this isn't very hard. It just had to be looked at a different way. So we ended up generating 4 rules. The 4 rules that you need to understand to do Agile security. The first one is IT security is a non-functional requirement. We're used to writing all requirements and stuff. It's just a non-functional requirement. Like performance, it's just a non-functional requirement. Anybody who's telling you differently is probably your IT security manager who wants you to take his process more seriously. Failure to meet those requirements equals risk. And we're used to this kind of situation. We're used to generating risk. So this isn't too hard to get your head around. But if I want to know where my risk is coming from, where my security risk is coming from an application, it's because something I was supposed to be doing didn't happen. Risk controls those wonderful technical things that you're always insisted on doing. You must be using SSH v3. You must be using TLS 1.2. Those are just functional requirements, like any other functional requirement you've got. Well, if they're documented and you're listed and you're doing them, this is just another thing to work on. And finally, to make the entire certification and accreditation to work agilely, you need to know what your risk is at any moment in time. As long as you know what your risk is, you're dealing with certification and accreditation. You're dealing with the manual because you know where you are. Sounds nice and easy, doesn't it? Actually, when we started doing it, we found it wasn't quite, well, there's some gotchas. We had some learning experiences. A few things went a bit wrong, but in general, it worked pretty well. So what I want to talk through is how we got through this process. So let's start with stage one. The first thing we decided to do, security in stories. Now, this is where we start using Agile. So most people are aware of basic story structure. I'm hoping I'm talking to a bunch of people who are nodding and agreeing with me at this point. Wonderful. Remember, I'm not the Agile person. So, epics features stories breaking down. We've got our typical kind of structure, as a, I need a, so that kind of structure. Well, just a minute, I've got acceptance criteria there. Well, we're used to that. Well, my acceptance criteria is starting to now reference back to my security. And I've got development standards, which are going to be part of my definition of done. Well, just a minute, this is all stuff we know, isn't it? We do this. So, start to write security into those functional, non-functional requirements like you'd write anything else. And use your acceptance criteria as a way of generating those test scenarios to prove if you've done it or not. Failure equals risk. Great, we can work with that later. If you've got secure coding standards, brilliant, wonderful. Just make them part of your definition of done. OWASP, produce a top 10. The top 10 worst, most common things that you find bad on websites. Unfortunately, it's been the same for like years because everybody keeps on doing the wrong thing. Tons of code checking tools for this kind of stuff nowadays. Go and have a word with the security guys. They've got some that can help as well. Get it into it. Now, I'm not going to tell you which tool to use. I'm not here to sell you a technology. Work what's right for you. Different development frameworks are going to use different things. And this is the one that people have a problem with. Don't write security stories. Why are you trying to write a story to do security? Aren't you supposed to be writing your stories to be giving benefit? The very specific controls we gave you were just those functional requirements. And going back to, this works for performance as well. Any non-func. This is just one of those things you can start writing in. And that very basic thing, you're learning or earning security. I'm going to occasionally have to do some sprint zero kind of things. I'm going to have to set up some environments. I'm going to have some fairly pure security things in there. But they're normally because I'm trying to get a value. I'm trying to get something improved out of working through this. And if I'm not getting any value, question why you're doing it. Why would we do security if it doesn't actually give a business benefit? The manual wasn't written just to keep a couple of people in GCSB happy. Well, I don't think so. But they're there because they're trying to give you value. As a hint, if you want to try looking for your value normally, start with privacy. Most people who are doing applications are very worried about privacy. Most of the controls that we do in security are actually about privacy. Small amount about integrity, small amount about availability, but a huge amount about confidentiality. So, we've got that. Let's go back to our little picture again. Now we've got a problem though. We talked about risk earlier. So this is where we start entering something a bit new that you wouldn't have seen before. This is one of the things that's written in the manual. Security Risk Management Plan. And the Security Risk Management Plan is not just for your project. It is for life. This is your end-to-end lifespan risk plan. Now, how many people have had project risk plans? No, you've done those project risk sessions where you sit down and you work out all the risks for your project, like key member of staff's going to get run over by a bus. and then you take it and you put it in your document repository and try to ignore it for the rest of the project. That is not what an SRMP is, okay? This is something you're going to actually use. We're going to introduce the idea that risk is actually a useful development tool. It's actually setting criteria. It's actually setting what you want to be doing. Risk is not a bad thing. It's a very, very, very powerful enabling thing if used right. So what do we want to know about our little set about risk? Well, it should have in there the risk, any remediation plans and controls you're going to have to reduce that risk should be written in there. Try not just write risk. Hey, we have this bad risk. Were you planning on doing something about it? Because if you're not, accept the risk and move on. Normally you're writing risk because you want to do something about it. So your testing failures come up with risks. Can you actually try tracking them? Writing them down? This would be an improvement. There are plenty of security examples out there of services that have been hacked where the people knew that the weakness was there. The testers had found it. Security pen testing found it. Great. We kind of forgot to go and fix it. Whoops. So just get earlier in that cycle. Now, unfortunately, we talk about automation in everything, test automation. There's one thing I'm going to say you cannot automate. I've never seen work in automation, which is writing of risk. It's actually a very, very hard thing to do. You need to actually have someone sit down and work out what the risk is. Well-written risks are brilliant, they're powerful, but you do need to have to think about them. But we can normally train up someone to write good risk in under an hour. It's not that hard, just have to learn the trick of doing it. The other thing is you're not going to just get risks by failure of testing. You're going to end up with risks because of just what you're doing. Some of the things you do come with latent inherent risk. I want to do a web app. I want to put it on the internet. Well, you know what? There's bad dudes out there. Whatever you do, you're going to have some risk. So you need to preload your SRMP with some risk. And this is one of the things that we got badly wrong. We spent 3 weeks, actually no, sorry, close to 6 weeks actually, sorry, writing an SRMP for a small app. It was amazing. It was packed full of generic risk. And there's a problem with generic risk. You can't do anything with it. So what I mean by generic risk is one of those wonderful phrases that people write. There is a risk that an unauthorized hacker will get into the system and steal data, causing a reputational damage. Okay, it's a structured risk statement. Doesn't mean anything. Who? Random person on the internet. Okay, that's a fairly hard user group to define. Can steal data. What data? Any of it. And it's going to cause us damage. Well, it depends what they stole. So they become very, very generic. Well, you can't write a compromise. You can't write a control for it because you don't actually know if your control would work or not. Now, there is the flip side of this, which is called threat modeling. And threat modeling is the methamphetamine of security. Everybody sits there and goes, yeah, we're going to do some threat modeling. Yeah, we're going to make our services better. We're going to do some threat modeling, yeah, because they're good. Yeah, we can cope with it. We can handle it. We can stop at any point. No, you can't. You start writing them, and you're writing them for months. And they get deeper and deeper and deeper. So the worst I've had to review personally was 400 pages of A3. Now, it was an impressive document, and trust me, it was really nearly every single option we had. You're getting to the point where you're starting to think, should we be writing that aliens could come down and read the mind of our users and get their passwords? It's a risk. Yeah, we could do that. It's specific enough. Try to stay away from that level. One of the reasons with that is because your risk is now totally unacceptable to anybody who's going to own it. Trust me, trying to take a document like that to your senior executive and saying, are you okay with these risks? You'd need to book like 3 weeks out of their time to take them through every page of it, and then they don't like you after that. We tried. Don't go and do it. So these have to be very specific to what you're actually going to be doing. Oops, wrong button. So we go back to our diagram again. And now we're going to put a little thing on the left-hand side here. So this is my little thing here, statement of applicability. We used one of the best rapid prototyping tools that we could find, Excel, to write ourselves a little thing that looked at a load of the controls out the manual and said, what kind of application am I doing? Do any of these make sense for it? Yeah. Well, great, let's write some risks about those and put them in there. So we can literally say, oh, it's web-facing, it's got some client data in it, literally click some radio buttons, and out of it falls, here's some standard risks, very specific risks, so to do with your kind of project. And then if you want to know your risk assessment at any point, the bit that you feed into that certification pack, the bit that actually tells you what your risk is, take a dump at that moment in time of your risks. That's what your risk is at that moment in time. This now becomes very, very time delivered. If you're starting to do continuous delivery, you're trying to drop multiple times a day, you're doing things regularly, as long as your risk table's up to date and you can export that at some point, that is your point in time assessment. Certification and accreditation is always going to be point in time, because it always has to have someone signing off that this thing happened at this date. Yeah, I said, we're waterfall, remember? But we can make that waterfall now very, very easy to produce. Because what we can now start doing is saying, what was manually created and slow beforehand, we can now just export. It's a point in time. Yeah, well, it's always going to be a point in time. But it's a point in time that you can do repetitively now. You can make your point in time quite short now. I'll give you an idea, most organizations in government struggle to do these every 2 to 3 years. Classic certification accreditation, 3 weeks of a security consultant, just to write the pack, possibly longer. How can you do that if you're releasing twice, every week, every 2 weeks? And that technical part is now just a copy and paste out of whatever is your risk table. Now, in MSD, we did a beautiful piece of development. We actually developed our own risk tool using Agile, so we actually worked it as we went along. And we now have our own risk tool that we can actually do these kind of exports from. Very, very, very powerful, easy way of doing it. So now I've got my risks. I've got them in a table, but I'm probably going to be asked to do something about those risks. Nearly every business owner that you ever go back to saying, are you okay with us going live with all of these risks? Sit there and go, no. Are you okay with paying me to make them go away? No. I have a problem here. They want some information about it. So now, why don't we just start feeding them back into our backlog? This is what we do with other things. Why aren't we doing this with security as well then? I mean, after all, if we had a functional requirement failure that came up in testing, you'd just be feeding it straight back into your backlog. If you weren't fixing it at the time, it'd go into your backlog and be prioritized in there. Well, why aren't we doing the same thing with the security stuff? It's just another set of requirements. I mean, I'd even go as far, if you want to be really, really extreme on this, if you've got some stuff in here that you know is a risk, and you're feeding it into the backlog, take it off your risk register. If you know you're going to be fixing it in the story, take it off the risk register. Put it back on if your testing fails. But if you're working on something, trust your processes are going to work right and they're going to remove it. Keep your risk register nice and small. You don't want these things to blow out because you can't deal with them then. So yeah, update your backlog. Functional requirements are your future stories. Now here's another little interesting piece. You now know which risk came from which epic feature and story, because it came through your testing cycle. So you can now follow it all the way down. And this actually gives you a wonderful little bonus feature. Risk is now part of a functionality, and therefore it stops risk paralysis. Now, what do I mean by risk paralysis? How many people have called in a pen test 2 weeks before they go live, and the pen test has come back with something? And you go to the business owner and say, you've got a bad vulnerability. And they go, my God, can you fix it? Yes, in 3 weeks. But I go live in a week. How does this work again? Everybody's come across this scenario. Oh my God, can we go live? Can we not go live? What do we do about it? Because people look at the risk as part of a total system. My application has got this in. Regularly in security, we'll get the, oh my God, I've got this vulnerability. Shall I take my entire application offline? Well, if you know only one tiny bit of it's broken, can you just remove the one bit that's broken? Is that better for your end users than taking everything offline while you fix it? You don't normally end up coding security issues in that are platform-wide. They tend to come in small little units, normally the last thing you changed. So can you just roll that back and still go live with other features? So you can now start making a lot more customer-centric views of what you're doing with your risk. Our stage 5 is maturity. We eventually start getting good at this. But I mean, is it just too hard to bother with? I mean, security, no one wants to do it. It's a pain. Who wants to do this stuff? And then we started doing some numbers. So you're going to find that you start getting all your defects found earlier. Why did you put your security process at the end of your life cycle? If it's now embedded in everything you do, you're going to get it much quicker. Your resourcing costs for security, we worked out, we think are lower. We did some envelope calculations, and we worked out between 10 and 20%, which is a little unusual. I put more security in, it cost me less. And that's primarily because the resources that you have for doing your security, you can start utilizing on multiple projects. So what did we used to do? Development, testing, and then in a big batch at the end, give it to a security person for 3 weeks to go and test. Well, great, that security person is flat out for 3 weeks. Mainly trying to learn what you did previously. But if they were involved in what you did previously, they already know it. So that stage becomes a lot quicker. And now because they're only doing smaller pieces of work, and writing the documentation is a lot quicker, suddenly they're not in these big blocks. So rather than being 3 weeks and they can't do anything else, they might only blocked out for a day or so. Now you can start having them working multiple projects. You start getting a lot more efficient use out of your security team. Now, as your maturity increases, you're going to standardize a lot of this as well. You don't write your stories from scratch every time. You borrow bits from ones you've seen before. You reuse bits of technology. So why wouldn't you do so with security? These are things you're just going to keep on lifting off from somewhere else and keep on reusing. Gives you a lot more fluid and dynamic way of working through this. And you're going to need to embed security resources to get this going. And even when you're doing it, you're probably still going to want them there. Now, this is the bit that gets people a bit surprised. Well, why aren't security in your development teams? Why aren't they in your multifunctional teams? Why do they have to sit outside? Why are they this weird thing that sits off at the other part of IT? After all, they're delivering part of a service to you. They're just as valued member of that team as your BA, as a developer. They're all adding value. So why not get them in earlier? Now, this was a kind of shock and awe moment when we started doing this. What, we're going to put them into, writing stories? Yeah, that's where they need to be. Because trust me, they've come with a mindset that is different to your BA and your tester. They're going to be thinking about different things. Now again, as that uplifts over time, you might not need them as much, but boy, you're going to need them to get started. But you're going to need them a lot less at the end, so you're going to save later on. And then about penetration testing, because I'm a security dude, so we always talk about penetration testing. Now, for those who aren't aware of penetration testing, this is where you go and normally get an external third party, unless you're very lucky and have internal pen testers, but it's normally an external third party. You pay them an epically large amount of money to basically break your systems for you. They're great. And I can tell you what they do. What they do is they take your application, they take an absolute standard off-the-shelf product, run it across the top of it, find all the defects that you didn't know about, which were nice and simple to fix, write it up as a report, and then have a triple shot latte and not do any work for the rest of the day. Because you gave them an easy life. All of those simple things to find were sitting there. Well, I know lots of pen testers. Make their life difficult. You can use the automated tools yourself in your coding development. Great. Pick it out at that level. Now make them work for it. Pen testing has an amazingly high value. It's great stuff. And it needs people who really understand it to do it well. make them work for it then. Make them actually drive through and do some hard work on your application. Because the second you put your application on the internet, millions of people are going to do that to your application. So therefore, make them do the work then. Find it for you at that point. Don't give them an easy run of things. Ask the hard questions. Make them work for you. So yeah, you're still going to do pen testing, but now it should just be validating that your code was good in the first place. I look forward to the day when I have a pen tester come back and complain at me because they've just spent 5 days and couldn't find anything. Because that's when we've got the process right. So what can we do next with this? Well, let's start with Agile. We're an Agile organization. Don't try doing it all at once. I've shown you quite a lot of things there. Don't try putting everything in one go. It's not, well, we're in an Agile conference. Do it in the bits that make sense. Pick them out. And don't try believing, just because I've listed all of those things, that you need to do them all. Work what you can fit into your cycle. This worked for us. These are concepts. These are ideas that worked for us. Nick them, steal them, change them around the place, learn from them. See how you can fit them together. But I would say start on your standards. If you have poor software development standards and you're designing insecure code to start with, however much certification framework you wrap around it, you're still going to have bad code to deal with. But that's easy to fix. There are so many good, often free source checking tools, development tools to help. And I said, if you're not aware of this stuff, the surety guys have got some stuff on demo upstairs. Go have a look at some of that stuff. Pick out what works for you, what makes sense for you. Don't expect your BAs, developers, and testers to be able to do it by themselves. They really can't. It's not their fault. They've not been trained in this stuff. So give them some help. Pull in some specialist knowledge. Pull in your security team nice and early. Get them in there, teaching them, working with them. As they get better, they'll learn this stuff. It's not that hard, honestly. I managed to work in the industry. Which does give us a challenge, because now you're going to have to find the IT security people who can work this way. This one's a bit more tricky. Because the IT security people normally kind of get edgy when you put them anywhere near developers and starting to write stories and, well, tough guys, you're going to have to learn. This is the world that we now live in. You're developing this way. This is how we're working. So get on board, start getting helped in here. And anybody who's written risk stuff is going to be agreeing with you. They're going to be backing you up on this. I mean, and finally, and to me, the most really, truly important one, go and hug your IT security manager and tell them your stories are perfectly fine. But thank you very much for listening to that. Said it was a great little audience to have. We have 3 minutes still. So if anybody has got any questions, I'm more than happy to take any questions.
So, any questions?
my MC.
Yeah, we have one.
I'm keen to hear some examples of stories that have security elements in them.
So you might have a story when you're talking about developing a shopping cart, and you're now saying that we're going to have a login on it. Okay. Did we start thinking about password strength on that login? Might be another story. We need to do some password checking of strength on there. Did we do any input validation? This is into your testing scenarios. Because trust me, we love the fact, truly love the fact that basically you go, great, input box, text, let's ram anything we like into it. That's how we hack systems. So did you start putting that into there? What were those use cases that the hacker was thinking about that I could do to this system? So a lot of those are going to be testing requirements you want to be looking for, or they're going to be sitting there going, did you think about how we could secure this in the first place? Hi, I want to store a data blob. Cool. Should I encrypt it? Do I need to? If I don't need to, don't. But if I need to, should I? Cloud's a wonderful complex area of this at the moment in time. What's my risk profile in cloud? Want to use more cloud? Okay, might be great, but do I need to worry about the offshoring of data? Do I need to be doing some encrypting of it? Do I need to be holding keys? All of these things are bits that you can write into those stories. Security goals. We love IoT because the S in IoT stands for security. And if you put identity with IoT, you get idiot. That's the other one that you'll hear from security people. Or if you are doing anything in that space, expect someone is going to do something bad to it immediately. And even just out of not even malicious, just accidental. Great little story, Alexa, you know, the Amazon ordering gizmo-y thing, comes without a fixed thing, so you can just ask Alexa. And a kid in America had asked Alexa to play with her and her doll set, which is very nice. Alexa took this as an order to go and order it. So Alexa goes and orders one. Great. The local news ran the story on it and said, just by saying, hey, Alexa, do this, great. Every Alexa unit was near a TV, listened to it, and then ordered the same thing over again. That's where you have to start thinking those negative, daft security use cases that security dudes come up with into your development. Because that seems farcical right until the point that several 100,000 units of this got bought by robots, basically. But that's the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about. And yeah, the more we go into IoT, those kind of technologies, it's going to get worse, much, much worse. Might squeeze in one because we don't have hordes of people coming in yet. If there's any other questions?
Yes, I have one. How on that maturity curve are you at the ministry?
So we have done this on one small part of one application. And mainly we're having to figure out how we do things like internal staffing of this. How do we retain teams? The principle works, and we proved it works very, very well. And again, we're still going through our maturity in Agile as a ministry. As we're developing that, that's helping us move further along. But very quickly, we realized that we were going to have to develop this in parallel with it. MSD, we use SAFE. I am at every single PI. I'm speaker at that. I'm involved in boards. I'm going around looking at stories saying, you need to get someone in to talk to you about that. You need some help in that area. So we haven't got it fully embedded yet, but we understand why we have to be at that earlier stage.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so before you do anything else, go into the app, rate this session, please. Stick around for the next session, which will be on carry on learning. But in the meantime, let's have a round of applause for Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.